All right, so in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to start taking a look at how to create a meteor impact. And to do this, we're going to start getting into some stuff outside of the terrain toolkit inside of Houdini, more procedural modeling. So we'll be taking some stuff that we've learned from the intro to Houdini and some of the bits from the scattering. And we're going to use that to create a base mesh that we'll use to create this impact. All right, this is going to be the end result that we have. And we'll go ahead and dive right into it. All right, so we'll just start by creating a geometry node. We will rename this to be Meteor Impact. I'll go ahead and dive inside of there. And then we'll just start by dropping down a grid. So tab grid, make that visible. And to get started with this, we're going to make this really dense. We're going to be essentially modeling out a sphere inside of here. So we're going to need this to be super dense. So I'm just going to change that the rows and columns to 250 and 250. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a hotspot. We did a lot of this in the scattering, so this should be a little bit of review for those of you guys that did the Houdini randomization and scattering tutorial. So I'm going to drop down a sphere, and we're going to use that to generate a hotspot. I'll drop down 2 color nodes. So one color node being full white, and then another color node to be fully black. 0, 0, 0. And then what we'll do is we'll do an attribute transfer. So ATTR and then TRIB. Whoops. Attribute transfer right there. Oh, can't spell. All right. So we'll go ahead and plug in that. So the grid plane is on the left, the sphere is on the right. And it's going to go solid white, which is not what we want. So if we go into the attribute transfer, we're going to turn off the auto attributes, and we'll just leave points on and primitives off. We'll choose attribute CD right here in the pull down. And then over then into conditions, we'll go ahead and take the distance threshold all the way down like that. And we'll leave that at 0 because what we're going to do is go into this blend mount. And I'm going to just leave that to be a value of 3. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to use this to drive the position attribute. So we did a lot of this again in the Houdini randomization and scattering. But essentially what we need to do is we need to take this color attribute and we need to minus it out into the position of the Y, which will essentially create a creator for us. So to do that, what we'll do is we'll create a point VOP. So we haven't done much of the point VOP. This node specifically can get really complex. We did a little bit in the intro title, and we'll do a little bit more now. So there could be, and I'm hoping to release an entire video over this one node, the point VOP. It's essentially a visual scripting inside of Houdini. So if this part kind of is a bit too much, don't panic. It's pretty in depth. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take the position attribute from the left and output it into the right, but what we're going to do is modify in between here. And to do this, what we're going to do is go ahead and add that. We'll do add. So, and then we'll add that onto the color. But what we want to do is instead of adding it on top of the entire position, so we'll take the CD and add it on top of the color. You'll notice that if we do that, it essentially bulges out like that, which is not what we want. We want it to go straight up or straight down. So essentially to do that, what we're going to need to do is to do a vector to float. So a vector being a 3-way attribute, which is position, color, and then float being a single attribute. So we'll do vector to float, and then we'll do float to vector. So we'll do X, then Z, and then essentially we can now plug this one into the Y. And now we're essentially only going to be modifying that one Y attribute. But we've got a little bit of an issue here. our essentially our x going in there. So we need to actually take the middle input, go into like that. So the x value is going into the float. The z value is going in there, and then we're grabbing the y value and adding it on top of the color, which then is essentially now offsetting that. So we're going to want to reverse this. So if we throw down a multiply constant node, what we can do is put this in between this CD and the add node, and what we're going to do is multiply that by a -1, which essentially reverse those values. The value that I used specifically was 1.1. And then we'll notice that if we do space 3, we're kind of getting this like not really the shape that we want. That's because the color value itself is pretty linear, which is kind of giving us this S curve. So what we're going to want to do is drop down a color correct node and essentially gamma crunch this down. So we'll do tab color correction. And then gamma is going to control our midpoint. So if we go down on the gamma or up on the gamma, it's essentially taking that midpoint, that gray value, and expanding it out. So I'm just going to leave this off as a value of 2 right there. Great, and then we essentially have a pretty decent shape there. So I'll go ahead and jump out of there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to want to do another hotspot. But essentially this time what we're going to do is, instead of doing the hotspot in the center, we're going to do the hotspot right around the edge. So to do that, what we're going to do is essentially just take this setup right here, and including the sphere, we're going to copy it, then we're going to paste it. And now we're going to take this color value and then just plug that into the point fob. And now all we got to do is just tweak the sphere node and this attribute transfer node, and then we're all good to go. So we're going to want to change the sphere node over to a polygon mesh. If I just scale this up like this and do attribute transfer, we'll notice that we're not really getting the result that we want. That's because the sphere node is not, it doesn't have any points except for, if I actually check this out, our point position currently lives on 0, 0, 0. That's because this is still a primitive shape. It's not an actual geometry shape. So what we're going to do is change this over to a polygon, which will essentially give us all the attributes that we need. Those attributes are going to exist outside. So now if we do an attribute transfer, we can see that it's starting to get somewhere. We're going to want to increase the frequency so that the higher this goes, essentially the better the resolution is going to be. We're going to want to scale this down to be something right in there. So essentially that sphere is going to match up with this right there. So the value I'm going to leave off, I'll just leave that off at a value of 3. And then if we go to our attribute transfer, we'll be able to take this blend width down to something like 1.5. And now what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to take that existing value and copy and paste our point fob that we made. So we'll just call this point fob lower. I'll copy and paste that, and we'll rename this to be point fob raise. Currently it's going to do the same thing, which is going down, but we want to do the opposite, which is go up. So what we'll do is we'll just dive inside of here. We'll go to that multiply constant, and then we'll just keep that at a positive value. So if we go to 1, we'll notice that right there we're getting something. We're not going to want to go up that high, so we're going to want to do something like 0.5, which is going to be about half. And if we go into space 3 over the viewport, if we go into our wireframe by hitting W, we'll see that we're essentially now getting this bubble effect. If we disable this color correct, we'll notice that, whoops, we'll keep that on. But if we play with this now, we'll see that we can actually get the reverse effect. So I'm just going to leave this at a value of like something like 0.3. So if I go back into my perspective view by hitting space 1, we'll start to see that we're getting somewhere, and we'll see that we're getting these like really chunky results. So it actually doesn't look bad. If we look back at the references, it is pretty chunky along the edges, so we're kind of getting that for free. And we can, if we come up here and play with our frequency of our sphere, so say if I do something like 5, we'll notice that those chunks actually get bigger. This wasn't something I was planning on, but it just kind of happened pretty naturally. So I'm going to leave that maybe on a value of 7. So this is going to really imply scale. Great. So moving on, I'll just reset the color now since we don't need that. I'll do color, plug that in, and then essentially now what we can do is now we can do another height field project. So I'm going to save really quick. Great. So I'll do another height field, and then we'll do height field HF project, and then we'll plug these two in. And we'll notice very similar result that we did with the skull. It's way too small. So we got to scale it up to be something a little bit more relevant. So I'll do tab transform. I'll go ahead and drag and drop that over top of our noodle right there in between the project and the color. And we'll go ahead and boost this up to something like 100. And boom, right there, you can see we got a pretty decent starting point. We'll notice that something interesting is happening. The height field isn't actually going into the negative value. So what we have to do in the height field project node, what we have to do is essentially do add. So add essentially, it's a little confusing because like you think add so it would only go up, but because we have negative values in here, it's also going to go down. Great, so moving on, we'll do a height field distort. This is going to essentially, we need to essentially break this up. So height field distort. So what we'll do, HF distort by noise. Whoops. My screen recording is causing me some display stuff, so bear with me on that. So we'll go ahead and plug in the distort. Just like before, we want to do some broad strokes before we do our fine strokes. So we'll do a value of maybe like 2000. And then we'll do really kind of crank this up. This will kind of give us more of like an irregular shape. We don't want to go too irregular. We want it to be somewhat circular. So we'll do it a little bit like that. Maybe we'll do our element size as at like maybe 100. Yeah, there we go. So it's still circular, but it's a bit more irregular. I'm going to leave that maybe like a value of like 35. Great, and then what we'll do is height field distort to get the high frequency. We'll do distort by noise. So this is going to be the micro details. I'm going to do an amplitude of something like 20 to kind of really crank that up. So now we got a couple different things that we got to do. Specifically, we want to blur these transitions. So if we notice into our impact, it's really, really rough along the edges, but if we look here, it's really, really rough around the edges, but on the inside, it's going to be very, very smooth. So we want to kind of simulate that a little bit. So what I'm going to do right now is do a height field erode. We'll plug that in. And I'm going to do this now, just compute range. And I'm just going to hit play because I want to just see how far this is going to go. Because we may have to actually smooth this out a bit on our own. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off our grid right there. So it's doing a pretty good job of smoothing that out. So I'll go ahead and keep this down here. We'll keep working on this a bit. So you notice that our area out here is going to be pretty open and pretty just not detailed at all. So what we have to do is start adding some overall noise. So we'll do a height field, then we'll add some noise, and we'll make that visible. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to something like, we'll try maybe the really cellular, the secondary one, just to create some irregular shapes. And we'll go ahead and do the center noise off, and we'll do amplitude way, way down, just like that. So just to create some kind of irregular shapes. And what I'm going to do is actually take this noise, and I'm going to actually change this to be all the way at the top. That way it's going to receive the same distortions that we had before. So I'm putting that before. And now as we go through, we'll see that our distortions, all that kind of stuff is going to be picking up on all that, which is great in this case. Great. So what I'm going to do is kind of back this up a little bit and then go to our height field and do a little bit more resolution. So I'll go to my height field node, and what I'll do is 2000 by 2000, just to kind of give us a better perspective of what's happening on the outside. We can see that we're kind of getting some pretty decent results. Like we're getting like these flat patches, which looks pretty good. But now we can start to say, hey, do we need more irregularity in this? And it looks like we do. So like this is getting pretty, it's almost a little bit like rectangular, elongated one way. So what I'll do is I'll come back into our original transform node right here. And what I'll do is in the scale, I'll do like 1.2, and that's going to kind of like elongate that. So it's going to be a little bit of an egg shape. Great. So that's looking pretty good. So we'll go ahead and start working on the colorization. So we'll do height field erode. I'll go back to the beginning to kind of reset that. And I don't really want to worry about this colorization because I want to actually do that after the fact. So I'll go ahead and just do an erosion. I'll let that play through. And then after the fact, we'll do another height field visualization node to colorize this. And I'm just going to let it play through. We're going to want a lot of erosion that happens here. If we look back into this area right here, specifically the center, it's very, very smooth. So we want to make sure that we capture that. There we go. We'll just kind of let it play out, and we'll stop it right there. So frame 30 seems to be pretty good. And what's great about this is once we have it cached out, we can actually just do this, just kind of scrub, and we can kind of see where the breaking point where we want. And I think actually we want just to kind of keep it all the way up at value 30. Seems to be doing pretty good. Great. And now what we'll do is we'll throw down a height field visualize. We'll go ahead and plug that in, and then we'll do remove tip team. I like to do that just in case we go back up here and add a mask, and then we'll do compute range. We'll notice that we're getting this little white area right there, so compute range, and then we'll do a little bit lower to get rid of that, and then we'll go a little bit above this too, maybe a value of like 60, just to make sure that we're getting the tips there. And then what we'll do is we'll really kind of play around with this in terms of the color. So if we come back here, we'll notice that the tips are very, very white, and we have all this stuff happening right here. These erosion patterns that are kind of like a brown. Then the broader stuff is really, really brown. So we want to make sure that we capture that. And it's going to take a little bit of finessing to get in there. So if I come back here, what I'm going to do is go ahead and select each one of these and exit them out. So select that, exit out, select that, exit out, select that, exit out. Great. And then what we do is we'll come up here, we'll double click on that, and we'll do something like a desaturated, very luminous, very, very bright surface like that, mimicking that really, really bright surface. Maybe a little bit more saturation. And then what we'll do is we'll kind of come into the mid value, and we'll select something like a darker gray value like that. Maybe a little bit darker like that. And then I'll just kind of start pushing and pulling this until we get something that we're kind of into. So specifically, we know we want those white tips. So this is going to have to be pushed a little bit more. And if we need some more resolution to play around with, we can kind of push this and kind of make some more values like that. The inner circle, if I check that out, we have like this like almost green stuff happening here. Could be some vegetation that's happening there. So the lowest point is going to have a little bit of green in there. So I'll come into the hue and kind of push that towards here. Undo out of that. We'll select this guy, and we'll kind of push that towards the green value like that. But we're going to be really, 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 really desaturated. and really, really dark on that. And I'll go ahead and move this up, and then I'll create another brown. And we want to kind of really crunch that like that. But we can see that it's kind of not really looking good. So what we want to do is maybe we'll take this brown and or take this green pattern, and we'll color pick this, and we'll actually use some attributes to do this. So I'll select that green, so we have an attribute down here. Maybe we'll use like the water attribute, which is going to start to get a lot of that stuff happening, which is starting to look pretty good. So I can go ahead and just exit out of that. So that's starting to feel a lot more organic. Great. And to kind of increase the variation there, what I'll do is I'll take this brown and I'll kind of make this a little bit darker. Great. We'll make this green just a little bit darker and desaturate it like that. Cool. So we're starting to get somewhere now, but it feels very artificial. So maybe we'll play around with like, what I like to do is maybe we'll stick this and make this color red, and what we'll kind of do is kind of go through each one of these attributes just to see what they're getting, and that will kind of help us find something like this, for example, that really, really, really feels quite organic. We'll try the water. Yeah, so we'll try debris, and we'll kind of take this, and maybe we'll use this as a foundation. So we'll take the debris, we'll put that in the initial, and we'll change this to water. So we have that initial one that we can use more of a brown. So we'll take that, select that brown, but we're going to want to create some variation there. So what we'll do is maybe bring that up in the luminance value, desaturate that like that. With this terrain colorization and texturing, we really want to focus on creating as much variation as possible. So even if you take a brown and shift it around a little bit, the results can get there really, really quickly. So I'll go ahead and take that second color and color pick that brown, and now we'll just take that colorization and just kind of shift it towards green just a little bit. And we don't have to have much to kind of make it feel green. There we go. We just have to have a little bit in there like that. And the little bit of shifting towards green really starts to feel pretty natural. Cool. So we'll take another look at this. So something I'm seeing is that there's a lot of like really, really sharp. These could be roads, but specifically up here, there's very, very sharp values that are very bright. So let's take a look at the mask by feature option and see what we can get. So we'll do high field mask by feature. And so this is starting to look pretty good just by doing the sloping. And then if we kind of go like this, we can start to get some really interesting results. And this is actually starting to feel a lot more organic than what this is, because this is like a really, a gradient value that's making this brighter. Whereas this is going to be much, much, much more like organic looking. So maybe we can like leave these tips being white, but then we can take this value and do something cool with it. So we'll go ahead and choose that mask. So we can just go in the pull down option, choose mask. And what I'll do is, again, just select the brown color. I'm going to color pick this. I'm going to actually pick a brighter one, and then we'll kind of deviate from that. So I'll go down like that. And we can kind of come back here, select that brown, maybe deviate from that, desaturate it a little bit. So it's still kind of separating itself from the original, but we can see it a little bit better. Cool, not bad. So if we check out the original again, so going back and forth here. This outer area is looking very, very, it's a lot brighter. So this gets a little bit darker, and this area out here gets a lot brighter, and then it gets darker again. So the best way I think to kind of try that out is maybe this entire thing is kind of on a hill, which will kind of get us back into that world where this area is going to be brighter overall, and then out here it's going to be, so you can see like this area kind of elevates. So instead of trying to force that into the color, what we can do is just come back here, up here, and start to kind of elevate this a little bit more. And to do that, what we can do is just drop down a height field paint. We'll go ahead and select that. I'll make my mask node really, really large, like that, and I'll go ahead and paint in this area like this. So we're getting a really, really large hotspot. Then we'll do a height field mask blur, just like that, to soften that up. And we'll really, really make this really, really broad, something like 500. And then what we can do is we can do a height field transform. And then we can kind of go up on this. So we can, we can do height scale. What I'm going to do is actually play around with the offset. So if we play around with the scale, it's going to be multiplying both positive and negative, which isn't necessarily what we want. So what I'll do is height field, we'll boost this up to something like maybe like 10. And now what we can do is height field layer, and then we can merge in between both of these based on that mask. And now what we do is we have control over making that center piece a lot more elevated. Great. And then what we'll do is we'll do a height field mask clear. Plug that in. Whoops. I'm going to go ahead and save. Great. And then if we run this through the erosion again, the mask by feature, the visualization, I'm just going to go down here to check this out. Not bad. We're going to want to run it through that erosion though again. So I'll go ahead and just let this play out. We'll leave it at a value of frame 30 again. Great, so we got that all cached out. We'll go to our mask by feature, then we'll go to our visualize and see where we're at. So we do have to tweak this a little bit. So this height value is getting a little too bright up there, so we want to kind of tweak this a little bit like that. There we go. So now that's starting to feel a lot more organic. And then we can take this this color value right here and really start to dial that in luminance value like that. But if we notice something is interesting, this up here is not looking right. So what we got to do is recompute that range before we move any forward. And we'll go ahead and make sure that this is going a little bit lower. So -57, then we'll do 105. Great, and now we can actually tweak this a little bit better. There we go. That's starting to feel a lot more organic. And I'll do some final tweaks to this mask. We want to go up on that luminance value just a little bit. Great, and then I think the water too, we want to go up a little bit brighter on that. So I'll go ahead and boost that luminance value. And I'm actually going to push it more towards the browns as well. I'm going to turn off my origin gnomon just so we can see it a little bit better. And not bad. Take a look at the reference again. Not bad. It's definitely not exact with terrain stuff and doing any kind of like procedural stuff. It's, you know, you never want to kind of try to match something exactly because you don't have that much control. you know, if you wanted to match this exactly, you'd have to like go into ZBrush and sculpt it, of course. So it's important to like get a bunch of references and kind of like see some similarities and kind of go from there. Jumping back and forth, I want to kind of tone down all these the veiny stuff that's happening here. So I think that's happening because of our water and debris. So what I'm going to do is just select this, color pick somewhere in here, and then kind of just deviate from there, just to kind of like get some variation, but nothing too overly dominant. Yeah, well, so we'll just color pick this like that, and then we'll kind of like desaturate and brighten up from there. Cool. So I'm going to wrap it up from there. Hopefully that was kind of good for you guys to see. I always like to throw in a tutorial where I don't exactly know where we're going to end up. And it kind of helps you guys see the exploration process. You know, a lot of the lessons I have them pre-prepped. So hopefully that was good to see. If you kind of get lost following along on this one, I definitely encourage you to kind of like open up this chapter 7 meteor crater, and then it's pretty easy just to kind of like go node by node in Houdini. So if you select something like the grid node, for example, you can see that these are highlighted, which means I tinkered with that one. So it's pretty easy to go node by node by node and just kind of like follow along that way rather than having to like jump around with me in the tutorial and kind of get lost that way. Great, so I'll end it right there and we'll get started in the next lesson.